Hey guys, this is Comic Uno, and today I'm doing Comic Uno's Best Comics of the Week, and this is the show where I review all the comics I've read this week in one show. We go least favorite to best pick of the week and everything in between, and at the end of the episode, we talk about the viewer's pick of the week, so in the comments below, let me know your pick of the week for a chance to be featured on the video. Let's get started. This was probably the biggest haul I've had all year. It's 20 books, the week of Thanksgiving. They're like, let's just release it all. So let's start with number 20, and that is Green Arrow issue 18. If you liked Jeff Lemire's run, you like that era of Green Arrow, it's a little familiar to that, at least of how dark it is. I do think it leans into the politics a little bit more here, but honestly, it just felt like a run-of-the-mill Green Arrow story. There wasn't anything that really stood out. There's no characters he really interacts with. The villain was kind of boring. I want to read more because I am a Green Arrow fan, but so far this hasn't really grabbed my attention like that last run with Joshua Williamson, where we got to see him interact and play with his history a little bit more. So giving that one 2 stars, and that is number 20. Moving on to number 19, which is Nightwing, issue 120. Pretty much the same on my list here because it kind of has the same problem. It's not a bad story. It just doesn't really feel like anything new. It feels a little generic. I want there to be a hook besides that this is a Nightwing book, and I just not seeing it here. I do think that, again, Tom Taylor's run, maybe not perfect, had a little bit more of an identity than this one. It feels like it's going back to the basics. The art feels very similar to the 90s Nightwing. It just not hitting home for me right now. But because it's Nightwing, I probably will give it a couple more issues to see if it finds its sea legs. So giving that one 2 stars, and that is number 19. Moving on to number 18, which is The Amazing Spider-Man issue 62. This is a weird one, because if I hadn't been reading Spider-Man and all the 60 issues of Zeb Wells, I might have actually given this a little higher. But it does feel familiar to that run while adding magic to the story. And for me, I'm not a huge magic fan. I'm not a huge Doctor Strange fan, so that element for me personally is not doing it. But the elements of his girlfriend and Black Cat I thought was weird. Like, I love Black Cat. I think she's a cool character. And in the end, she's like, oh, call me, I'm single. And then Doctor Strange is like, what are you doing? You know nothing about women. But then he's also in a relationship, so I didn't quite understand that. So a scene that I actually think I could have liked if they didn't just bring up their romance that's not going to work. I think it could have just been fun to see them interact or not have the girlfriend at all so we can see a relationship with them. Characters we're familiar with. And I probably like the Norman Osborn stuff the most, even though, again, it does feel like a remnant of that previous run. Nothing feels like it's progressing there. So overall, artwork is solid enough. I do think it's stronger than John Romita Jr. And obviously, this artist has worked on Spider-Man before. But I'm going to give it 2.5 stars. I do think other people might give it higher, depending on if you like Doctor Strange and magic. Because again, at least it has that flavor going for it. So giving that 2.5 stars, and that is number 18. Moving on to number 17, which is the MultiVersus Collision Detected, issue 6. It's based on a video game. It's your run-of-the-mill video game tie-in. If you've ever wanted to see Scooby-Doo fight with Batman or Steven Universe fight with the Justice League, that's what this is. It has some fun moments, has fun Easter eggs like the Justice League intro, but, you know, it's not completely a necessary pickup unless you maybe play the video game or if you're a hardcore Warner Brothers fan. So giving that one 2.5 stars, and that is number 17. Moving on to number 16, which is Batman Santa Claus Silent Night, issue 1. I really liked the previous miniseries. I was very surprised by it. I didn't know I needed Santa Claus to team up with Batman until I read that. So going into the sequel, I was really excited. But then I was reading it, I was like, did this need a sequel? I'm still not sure. But I like some of the newer characters introduced. I don't believe Zatanna was in that last volume. You do get to see Wally's daughter in the mix of it. So I like that. And honestly, just like that first run, especially for a weekly series, I feel like the art is really strong. I like Damien's connection to Santa Claus. So I'm curious to see where it's going to go, but I don't know if it had as strong of a hook as that first volume. So giving that 3 stars, and that is number 16. Moving on to number 15, which is the West Coast Avengers issue 1. I wanted to like this a lot more than I did, but this did give me enough to want to read issue 2. I also kind of was reading it for Firestar. She doesn't show up until the next issue. But my biggest pet peeve for this one is that it almost felt like an Iron Man book. It's like, all right, this is how Ultron's involved. This is how Iron Man's involved. Oh yeah, I guess Spider-Woman's here. Oh yeah, I guess this character's part of the team. And they're not really relevant to the book that makes them a team members. I didn't really love this as a first issue. Honestly, felt more like a 0 issue. I'm hoping issue 2 is more about the team, but that was definitely the thing that threw me off a bit. So I'm going to give that 3 stars, and that is number 15. Moving on to number 14, which is The Incredible Hulk, issue 19. I like the secondary stories more than I like the first one. I do feel like the series has kind of lost its way and lost its footing, not really knowing what direction it's going in and not really having a clear focus. But the other two, just seeing the other Hulks I thought were cool. And the last story, it's going to be leading into an actual series with Red Hulk. And I'm curious to see where that's going to go. I don't know if I care about the connection between him and Doctor Doom. But I like the art. It's been a while since we've gotten a Red Hulk POV series. So I like that. It's been a while since we've seen Armin's show. So that was cool. So that's what brought this to 3 stars. Also, anytime you get to see She-Hulk with really great artwork, I'm there for. And her discovering and reliving her trauma, I thought was interesting. So, I like the secondary stories, believe it or not, more than that main story. So giving that 3 stars, and that is number 14. Moving on to number 13, a book I wasn't originally going to get because there's just so many books and I was like, oh, it's kind of a serialized series, and that's Hyde Street issue 2. But it was a bit higher because I love the art. I like the Twilight Zone-esque-ness of it, but it is hard when you're reading so many books where you're like, well, I kind of want to read something more serialized. I want to feel attached to the characters, but I like they're doing the Twilight Zone. I liked how horror, how horrific it is, especially when it comes to the art. And I've never left any of the stories being like, wow, that was really bland. It's just, I don't know where it fits on my pull list. But I do know I'm not reading enough Ghost Machine stories. I wasn't a huge fan of Rook and Red Coat. It wasn't for me, even though I know a lot of people like those titles. And we'll talk about another Ghost Machine book later. But, I want to read more from him. This is kind of more my flavor for horror. So we'll see if it ends up lasting and how it's going to be connected, because the ending does have kind of that Twilight Zone staple of it all feeling connected. So I'm curious if that's going to happen and us seeing that more in the next couple of issues. So moving on to number 12, which is the Red Before Black. This one, I just like the characters. I like them exploring the PTSD of our main character and how this blonde almost... She's not Harley Quinn, but for some reason she kind of reminds me a little bit of the spontaneity of Harley Quinn. They get to team up and we get to see their past a little bit. And I will say the main plot, I don't know where that's going, but I like the characters. I think it's a cool character story and I want to see them interact more and see where it goes. So giving that one 3 stars, and that is number 12. Moving on, actually I think I might have given it 3.5. Let me see. No, I did give that 3 stars. Okay. Moving on to number 11, which is The Uncanny X-Men, issue 6. Love the art for this. I think Dave Marquez does a beautiful job. And I like the Chris Claremont feel to this book. I do feel like there's a lot of moving parts, but honestly, that was similar to his style of writing. I am more interested, believe it or not, in these new students. I like learning about them, and obviously you do need Wolverine and Rogue for people to pick up this book, but that's always where I felt like, oh, I want to see more, and where this issue picks up. The other stuff, for me, just kind of crowded it a little bit, whereas, like, I kind of wish there was more of a focus, because you only get a little bit of, let's say, the blonde girl, I was like, oh, I kind of want to see her origin story. I want a whole issue about her, and I think because they have to fit so much, I do think I always leaving wanting a little bit more. So giving that one 3.5 stars, and that is number 11. So moving on to number 10, which is Detective Comics issue 1091. This one's a little different from that last issue that focused more on Bruce's parents. This is focusing more on the element of the present story of Batman figuring out if he's too old to really do this anymore. He's like, okay, I've never taken anything to enhance myself, should I? And he has this like knee injury and he's like, okay, let me try something here, and almost plays off as like an old athlete. Like, what do you do when your body doesn't work the way it used to? And I think there's some interesting elements here. I do want to see more of how that connects to the parents, because that's something I really liked from the last issue. But I think Mikkel Janin and Tom Taylor are a really great team, and gives you enough information to want to read more and see where it goes. So giving that one 3.5 stars, and that is number 10. Moving on to number 9, which is Dazzler, issue 3, the not take anything too seriously series. There's not that much that happens in here, right? It really is just Dazzler being like, okay, these people hate me because I'm a mutant. My fans are kind of in danger because of it. So what do? I have all these canceled shows. There's some action, and then they kind of come up with a resolution in the end. It's just fun action. I like seeing the Tokyo scenes, as I just went to Tokyo a few weeks ago. So I was like, oh, that's cool that they took inspiration from actual Tokyo to do an action sequence, and it's just kind of popcorn fun. Don't take it too seriously. That's what I like about it. I like Dazzler. I like the music angle to it. I like that it feels different from other X-Men books. It's bright, it's shiny, it's a cool book. So giving that one 3.5 stars, and then is number 9. Moving on to number 8, which is Black Canary Best of the Best, issue 1. I feel like this kind of slipped past a lot of people's radar, but I liked it. I do feel like it was a little wordy. It's Tom King doing Tom King. There's times where I'm like, all right, kind of let's get to where we have to go to. But I liked the linchpin, I'll say, where we get to see this boxing match, or this fighting match, more MMA, I guess, than boxing, although they're using boxing terms without any gloves, where they get to see this match between Black Canary and Lady Shiva. How do you prepare for this match, and how's Vandal Savage related to it? And I like, you see the match, but then you're seeing what's going on in the background with Black Canary. I do feel like Tom King usually has artists that are a little bit stronger than the artist for this one. There's times where I felt like the facial expressions could have been a little stronger, but I liked it. I do think that the coloring is also a little bland. Maybe that's what added to that element. But I want to see more. Especially, you just had that match with the Mike Tyson and the Jake Paul situation. A lot of people watched it. Boxing's on a lot of people's minds. So I think it's interesting that they timed it this way. I don't know if they did that on purpose or not. But I think I'm interested to see Black Canary outside of everybody else too. You just don't usually see that. It's usually attached to Green Arrow. So to see her and her mom interact, I liked it. So I'm going to give that one 3.5 stars. And then it's number 8. Moving on to number 7, our topic of the video, which is Justice League Unlimited issue 1. Did we need the Justice League to return? And yeah, I do think you need that linchpin of the DC universe again. And I do think that's been missing for a lot of years. Did this book blow me away? No, I do think it's a little bit of a setup book, but I do like seeing these characters that normally wouldn't interact or just trying to figure out what it means to be a Justice League member, figuring that out. As a big Carol Ferris fan, I love that it was Carol. I like seeing Black Lightning. I like that this wasn't just Superman and Wonder Woman, and it does introduce you to the hierarchy of what the Watchtower is. We've seen this bleed through some of the other miniseries as well, like The Question, and there's been I think Black Lightning as well, so we're already seeing it attached to other books, and I like that connectivity. So yes, in that regard, I really love that Justice League's back. But then there's also elements that are from things we've already had, like Batman, Superman, World's Finest, because it's the same creative team. That character that's shown up since issue 1, he's here. He's kind of a bigger character. So there's some elements that's just like, oh yeah, the Justice League hasn't left. It just was like called something else. And obviously the Titans were supposed to be the Justice League at that point. They kind of were, and we got to see that bleed through with like Titans, Beast World. But yeah, I'm happy it's back. This didn't blow my mind, but I hope it does. It is more of a setup book that I hope will have a bigger story. I'm just curious to see how they're going to focus on different characters and if it's going to feel overwhelming or not. So giving that one 3.5 stars, and then is number 7. Moving on to number 6, which is Grommets issue 6, the penultimate issue of this book. It does feel like a penultimate issue. It does feel like it's leading towards something, but I liked a lot of the character moments here. The guns were a lot, and I was like, oh my god, this is happening to these teen characters, and it brought this kind of excitement level to the action of this book in the 80s. And supposedly a lot of this is like a true story of Rick Remender, so I'm like, whoa, that's kind of crazy that happened. And we get to see, most importantly, the relationship between these two friends and how this big, crazy moment and traumatic moment brought them together and let them understand each other a little bit more. And the artwork is phenomenal for this book. So I always say I just wish we had more slice of life books like this. And slice of life does not mean that stories don't have to progress. It just means they're character driven. They're more character driven than plot driven. So giving that 3.5 stars, and then is number 6. Moving on to number 5, which is Absolute Wonder Woman issue 2. This issue started out a little slower, which literally was like maybe 3 pages. And then right when you get to Steve, you're like, okay, I'm in. And you get to see this kind of twisted version of their origin story. But, when you go into Absolute, you thought they were going to be a little bit more evil, but they're really just edgy. And we get to see Wonder Woman's still kind, even though she was brought up in hell. And there is this really interesting conversation between her and Steve, where Steve's like, I thought I was a good person. Why did I end up here? And she's like, none of that matters. You didn't end up here because you were a bad person. And I'm not here because I'm a bad person. And I really like the moments between Steve and Wonder Woman in the present, where Wonder Woman has to kind of fight for her voice and say, hey, I know what I'm doing. Listen to me. All while this kind of looming terror of the big bad is coming by the end. So I thought it was a really solid issue. I really, it's doing everything Absolute should be doing. It's twisting the origins and telling a new story while also trying to tell something familiar. So overall, giving that one 4 stars, and that is number 5. Moving on to number 4, which is Hornsby and Halo issue 1. I knew this is the book I was going to enjoy the most from Ghost Machine. I love a good YA story. I like a story that's familiar to what we've read but doesn't feel regurgitated. That's kind of what this felt like. I do feel like I've read this story before, especially early 2000s, which makes sense with the creative team. And I liked that these characters didn't know who they were. And I also disliked that at the same time, where I thought I was going to get more of this kind of superhero aspect, and it really is more about them just being kids and being normal kids. And like the character from Hell actually has this really positive upbringing, and then the character who's an angel didn't. And you're like, oh, does your surroundings change you as a person? Like, just because she is innately a demon character is because she had a good childhood make her an okay person. So I'm curious to see if that's going to play a part as the series goes on. And yeah, the ending is like, oh, it was all a dream, or was it? And of course, they're going to be discovering what that means. And I like their connection between the two. I do think some of the beginning exposition could have been a little shorter, but I liked it. This has definitely sold me, and it's things that I like in stories and indie books. So I'm going to give that 4 stars, and that is number 4 for me. Moving on to number 3, which is Feral issue 8. This book always surprises me because I'm like, oh, okay, I don't know if I'm going to like this one. I read like the first 3 or 4 pages. I'm like, all right, so this is going to be the filler issue, right? And then as the issue goes on, that tension builds, and you're like, wow, Feral really never has a filler issue, does it? As we get to see this kind of real life stuff too, of like, oh, if a cat does something bad, you kind of put him in a room, and you're like, okay, time out. And you play a part with that, and there's like these dead cats around, and you're like, oh wow, that's so freaky. But then there's plenty of people who've had a cat that's deceased, and you're like, oh, I'll keep its ashes or something like that. So it's really, really interesting to see that play a part through a cat's point of view, and making it more horrific. All while you're expanding this story, and I think the pacing is really good, and I just like this unknown figure of the owner of these cats. You're like, are they evil? Are they not? Are they misunderstood? I don't know. But from the point of view of the cats, it's horrifying. So overall, giving that 4.5 stars. I just think this book does horror so well, even if you're not a cat fan. I'm not a cat person. I still really like this book. So giving that one 4.5 stars, and that is number 3. Moving on to number 2, which is the Tin Can Society, issue 2. Honestly, I just love learning more about these characters. You learn more about the romantic relationship between the character who died and the character who's our POV character. You get to learn a little bit more about the friends, all while you have this huge cliffhanger, which is why I brought this to number 2, of did the guy who died kill people? Question mark, question mark. Is that why he died? Like, there's a lot more to the story that's being unveiled here, and I like the pacing of how that's happening, all while they're building the characters with some wonderful artwork. So giving that one 4.5 stars, and that is number 2. Moving on to number 1 for me, and that is Superman issue 20. I love this book, because if you look back to issue 1 to 20, this looks like a different book. I love that every issue is purposeful. That doesn't always happen in superhero comics. Sometimes you do get those filler issues. Sometimes you do just get issues that are just actiony. But in this issue, you get to see the background of Doomsday. You get to humanize Doomsday, which I've loved about this drawing, humanizing those villains. All while like saying, hey, something big's gonna happen. Parasite's involved. I never liked Parasite, and he like dies in this. You're like, whoa, that's crazy. All while you do get this character story between Lois and Superman, and Lois having these powers and still keeping that a secret. So there's some really good character moments, really great artwork. I don't know how Dan Mora is doing both of these books. I think it's Dan Mora. Yeah, Dan Mora is doing this book too. He's doing so much, and I'm so happy to see it. So honestly, I just love the issue, and every issue again just feels so purposeful, which I love to see, and it makes it feel big. I love when a flagship book doesn't need an event to make a book feel like it matters, and this issue did that. So giving that 4.5 stars, that is my pick of the week. Let me know in the comments below what your pick of the week was. Last week's the pick of the week was Ultimate Spider-Man, and here are some comments about that. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. This is Comic Uno, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.